It had been a breezy kind of day. Katie discovered that it takes a lot of raking to make a pile of leaves. Orbie found out that it was a busy time for squirrels, who were racing around collecting nuts. And they both learned that if you cover yourself up with leaves, you can really surprise Dad when you jump up. After dinner, they decided that the time was right for a game of hide-and-seek. Katie sat on the steps with her eyes covered and started counting. Orbie shot off, hunting everywhere for a terrific place to hide. He crouched down as small as he could behind a little bush. Katie called to Orbie that she spotted him when she saw a little pink glow behind the small bush. They both raced for the step. Orbie ran fast, but Katie ran faster and beat him. This time, Orbie was it, and Katie hid. Katie told Orbie he would take 12 years to find her because she had such a good place. They both giggled. She told him he'd better hunt fast because they only had a few minutes before bed and raced off. Well, Orbie did his best hunting. He looked in the sandbox, under the steps, behind the tree. What he did find was very surprising. It was at the back of the garden where tall plants grew. Something orange peeked out from behind the plants. Orbie was really curious about it, but just then he heard a giggle and turned and ran toward it. He hunted for Katie, but there was still no sign of her, and he'd quite forgotten about the strange orange thing in the backyard. When Mom called, he asked for 2 more minutes to find Katie. And to tell you the truth, I think he'd still be looking now, except that all of a sudden a big achoo came out of the pile of leaves. It was followed by a giggle, and he shouted. Katie jumped up looking like a leaf monster, and they both raced for the back step. They got there at the same time. Orbie just had to tell his best friend that she really was the best hider in the world. As he was going back in, he glanced back and saw the last glimmer of sunset shining on the orange thing in the garden. It wasn't until all the lights were off and Katie was sound asleep that Orbie started to think about what that orange thing in the garden could actually be. And I should tell you right here, as the moon shone in through the window, Orbie was beginning to think it was something a little scary. He slipped out of the closet and tiptoed over to the window. Slowly he rose up, and 2 Orbie eyes peeked out over the backyard. At the very moment he looked, the moon moved out from behind a cloud and made the garden sparkle with a strange orange light. Orbie gasped and slid out of sight. Pressed against the wall of Katie's bedroom, Orbie tried hard to think of what to do to save his family. This was something spooky. Maybe even a monster. Orbie quickly zipped downstairs and made sure Dad had locked all the doors. He had. But as Orbie was tiptoeing up the stairs, he began to think how big the monster was. If its head was that size, he sat down on the stairs and thought, if the monster was very big, a little luck wouldn't help much. Orbie came up with what he thought was an excellent idea. He would put a whole bunch of things against the door and make it too hard for the orange-headed, people-eating monster to come in. And within seconds, a stack of furniture and pots and pans and books and all kinds of things were against the back door. As he tiptoed up the stairs again, Orbie stopped mid-step. What if the monster decided to come in the front door? Well, instantly Orbie piled all kinds of things against the front door. That should keep a monster out. And then with a yawn, Orbie went up the stairs. Soon he was comfy in his closet again and feeling safe and warm, and he drifted into a deep, deep sleep. The next morning, everybody but Orbie was awake, and slowly they stumbled down to the kitchen. Mom, who was in a sleepy haze, didn't notice too much until she went to sit in a chair, and the chair was gone. When Dad went to the bookshelf, he couldn't help but notice that all of the books were gone. When Katie came down, she looked at the big pile of stuff that was up against the door and asked why it was there. Well, the whole family, minus Orbie, tried to figure out what in fact had happened. And it wasn't until they noticed that Orbie was the only person not there that they realized it must have something to do with him. Katie raced up and asked Orbie to hurry down and see what had happened. Orbie was sure it was something awful, and he was also sure that it was the monster that had done it. When he walked into the kitchen to see 3 people wondering what was up, he was so glad to tell them about the monster. He explained everything. And Dad smiled. He told Orbie there was no monster at all. Orbie stood on one of the kitchen chairs and peeked out. That was when he knew Dad was absolutely wrong. Orbie wasn't sure, but he thought the monster was actually growing right out of the ground. He pointed to it. Katie shrieked with joy. Mom and Dad laughed. They didn't laugh at Orbie, but they laughed at the situation. Still in pajamas, the whole family held hands together and went out to see what Orbie's monster really was. Orbie was very frightened, so Dad picked him up. Katie was tugging everybody because she was so excited. At the back of the garden, glowing orangely in the bright October sun, was a huge pumpkin. Well, I don't have to tell you how relieved Orbie was, and impressed. He couldn't believe that the biggest pumpkin, maybe in the whole world, was growing from the tiny seed that he himself had planted last year. He turned to his family and started to giggle, and then the giggles turned to chuckles and chuckles to laughter, and the whole family was laughing with Orbie when he realized how silly he'd been. To this very day, it's still one of his most favorite stories to tell. And I hope it will be one of your favorites, too. I know that Orbie would just love that. He really would.
Did you know? Did you know? Did you know? Did you know? There are lots of different shoes that you can wear. You can wear running shoes outside to play, nifty black shoes with metal taps to go tap dancing, and soft little slippers for taking ballet lessons. But I don't think it's a good idea to wear your tap dancing shoes to ballet class. They're awfully noisy.